Cryptocurrency, DeFi, NFTs? Sounds confusing? BitLab Academy is here to help. We make it simple. Start investing in crypto, learn trading fundamentals, learn to mint and trade NFTs. Join our community today. Crypto for beginners, taught by the pros.
Welcome to Rice TVX. On today's episode of the Rice Crypto Show, I am joined by Kurt Wuckert Jr. He is the chief Bitcoin historian at CoinGeek. Today, we're going to be talking about Bitcoin, its history, the block size debate, who is Satoshi Nakamoto, and much more. Before we get into it, visit ricetvx.com and sign up for my mailing list so you never miss an update or new Rice TVX content. You will also find my various social media links and more. You can also find Rice TVX on Odyssey and Library, where I have a full catalog of my videos, post up extra content, and share other appearances. And you can also find Rice TVX on BitChute. Get your free half ounce of silver. Take full advantage of my partnership with Money Metals Exchange in 5 easy steps. 1. Visit moneymetals.com. 2. Be a first-time buyer. 3. Purchase a minimum of $100. 4. Use the promo code RICE. 5. Get a free half ounce of silver, and it's an additional way to support the channel. I will include links in the video description for everything I just mentioned, as well as everything shared on today's video. All right, joining me on today's show is Kurt Wuckert. He is the chief Bitcoin historian at CoinGeek. Kurt, I appreciate you coming on the show today. How you doing?
What's up, Chris? I'm doing good. It's good to be on here. Good to talk to you on your show.
And I'm definitely looking forward to the conversation. We did have the opportunity in January, I believe this year, to meet in Miami while I was attending North American Bitcoin Conference, and we got to hang out at a party going on at the Versace Mansion. And that's the first time that we got to hang out in person. And we had some pretty good conversations, some of which I don't remember, some of which I do. But it was a fun time. So I'm definitely looking forward to our conversation. Now, for people who might be unfamiliar with you, do you mind kind of giving a little bit of a background as to who you are?
Sure. This is my 10th year as a Bitcoiner. I got into Bitcoin in 2012. Not real deep. I started shallow, just like everybody else, confused about the tech and everything else, but took a deep dive. I got into mining in 2013. Didn't do particularly well with that because I got into GPU mining right as the ASIC started to hit the market. So I got my ass handed to me on that. Bitcoin taught me a lesson, basically. I got into mining Ethereum in 2015. Did pretty well with that, given my GPU rigs. And then I just was kind of a long time Bitcoin sort of communications guy. And then it kind of got quiet in 2015. I was interested in the scaling war, but I actually was more interested in dating the woman who became my wife in 2015. So took a little bit of a break and then came back in force in early 2017 when the ICO craze started to hit. Consulting a lot of people basically reaching out and being like, hey, Kurt, weren't you into this stuff a year or two ago? And I'm interested in buying some ICOs. And I basically just spun right back up like, oh, okay, cool. Crypto's doing a thing, and I've been involved ever since. So in 2017, we started the Crypto Traders Pro group, which is like a trading education group on Facebook. I started doing a live stream from the Sovereignty Network, which was a small news site over there, and then basically got super involved in scaling Bitcoin related research and development stuff. I was a Bitcoin Cash supporter in 2017, so I started running the Chicago Bitcoin Cash meetup in 2017, and got involved in what ultimately became the BCH BSV hash war in 2018. And now I work with CoinGeek. As of 2020, I started working at CoinGeek.com, which is a news site that covers BSV. Most do not. They don't want to talk about it. But I'm over there talking about the biggest big block Bitcoin. I also run Gorilla Pool, which is a BSV exclusive SHA-256 mining pool. And we hold the world record for mining the biggest blocks by total data and the fullest blocks by total transactions. The biggest block I ever mined was 2.5 million transactions. It was a 4 gigabyte block, basically proving that the Bitcoin protocol could always scale. And so I'm dedicated really to a lot of things. I'm also building a developer incubator in the Delray Beach area in South Florida, and doing a bunch of other stuff. But I'm a firm believer in the scalability of the Bitcoin protocol, and I'm stake my reputation on it, basically. We've been working toward solving a bunch of these problems for a lot of years, and I think a lot of people wrote them off, and I'm here to say, no, we shouldn't have written them off. I think we need to backpedal a little bit. Let's make our way back to Bitcoin the way that it was envisioned, and that's basically it. So I'm doing a lot of stuff. I'm a South Florida Bitcoiner, but I'm from Chicago. I'm pretty new to South Florida. I really like it here, but yeah, that's it.
Sweet, man. Did you move to Miami?
I'm north of Miami. I'm in Palm Beach County.
Okay. I've been considering something very similar, so I'll talk to you about that privately, but
Sounds
congratulations on that. So before you started getting involved with CoinGeek in 2020, were you doing any sort of writing or any sort of media before that?
Just a little bit. So I had done a little bit of work with Bitcoin.com. I was in discussion with them about doing a podcast over at Bitcoin.com in like 2017 and 18. And I have a long history of writing. I used to write. I mentioned the Sovereignty Network a little earlier. It was like Facebook focused, like super libertarian sort of politics and gold and that kind of stuff. So I used to write there, and then I have radio experience going back to 2004. This is when I first started doing radio. I did radio all through college, and I've been doing this a long time, like the media stuff. But 17 and 18, we started the Crypto Traders podcast, where we started interviewing developers and other things. So I've been doing a lot of media for the last like 5 or 6 years now in the Bitcoin space, but it's been different brands pretty consistently every year or two as things get shaken up. But I'm really happy over at CoinGeek. It's really where my heart's at. Like, I've always been very big block Bitcoin focused. And so it was weird for me when it was like, hey, Kurt, now you're going to interview this guy from this coin you've never heard of. And I got to like dig into it and ultimately hate it. And then I give like, I end up giving like a pretty rough interview to people, because I'm like,
Right.
well, you like, this is kind of a scam, isn't it? And then they're like, so, I'm in the most contentious. BSV is the most contentious thing in crypto, but it's what I believe in, and so I'm real good at advocating for it. And I was really bad at podcasting and stuff on other topics, because it was just like, man, this is just not necessary. It doesn't scale. It can't, like, none of this works. Your business doesn't make sense. So,
well,
yeah.
And this is one of the reasons too I was looking forward to having a conversation with you. One thing that I always encourage everyone to do is have conversations with people that you don't agree with on every topic, especially if important topics, and try to have a respectful conversation, because I've explained to you my search for trying to find out who Satoshi Nakamoto is, and we'll get into that, because you've been really forthcoming with your thoughts. You've been very transparent with that, and I appreciate that. And I'm trying to get a different perspective on BSV. But before we kind of get into the BSV Satoshi stuff and all that,
yep.
CoinGeek, is it specifically a BSV focused media crypto outlet, or is it covering
not
pretty much most everything?
I mean, it has a reputation of being just BSV, but we actually cover everything going on in the blockchain space. So if you just scroll through the homepage, if there's something going on in Ethereum, it's covered. If there's something going on, if Blockstreams, took a seed round or whatever, like, we cover it. So I mean, we cover general blockchain news, but our thing that differentiates us is that our editorial team, which I am an editorialist, like, I am going to write about like either something BSV specific, like I'm going to explain a concept, or I'm going to talk about some piece of history. I really love Bitcoin's history, because I think a lot of people just don't know it, and I lived a lot of it. So I like to write about people and things that are not talked about anymore from like a historical perspective. Or my most recent article I wrote about how like all the reasons Adam Back, the CEO of Blockstream, isn't Satoshi, because when polled, if you ask most people, like, who do you think Satoshi Nakamoto is? You get one of three people. You actually typically get Hal Finney, Nick Szabo, or Adam Back. And so 2 weeks ago, I wrote the Nick Szabo article. It's 2 articles back. And I basically just go into like,
this is part of your fake Toshi series?
this is part of my fake Toshi series. Yes.
Okay.
So, and people say like, you don't understand. Nick is such a cool guy. And it's like, I don't have a problem with Nick Szabo. I didn't even actually have a problem with Adam Back. Like, we disagree about Bitcoin, but both guys are probably good guys. But like people assume that they're Satoshi because the culture tells them that these guys are likely to be Satoshi. And most people, they talk about, don't trust, verify, but like nobody actually verify. Very few people actually verify. So I'm here to kind of clean up the narrative by just telling the truth. Like, what do we know? What is the evidence? Let's take a peek at it. And the Adam Back, I was actually shocked when I really dug into it. My conclusion was like, there is such a lack of any relevant evidence to him being Satoshi that I just can't even believe people are serious. Like,
yeah, I think people, just because he was British and he was cited in the white paper.
That's really what it comes down to.
I think that's really what that's as far as, because the British thing obviously was really important with a lot of the spelling and the way that Satoshi communicated, which could have been any sort of province of the UK, Canada, Australia, and even other parts of like South Africa and Africa, Africa specifically. So yeah, it's hard to determine that. Now I do want to get into because I have some interesting theories too that I'd like to get over, talk with you about, since you know a lot about the history. But being that you got involved in 2012, you started mining in 2013, and you started getting really heavily involved in early 2017, which is when I started getting into crypto finally. I started my channel January of 2018, was planning on starting it the summer of 2017, just procrastinated, but got involved early 2017 as far as like buying my first Bitcoin. So and I got to experience a lot of the things with the Bitcoin Cash hard fork. I got to talk to Roger Ver, get his perspective on what took place with the civil war over the block size. But what I'm really curious about, and taking BSV out of the equation, just coming from a historical standpoint of cypherpunks and what Bitcoin is supposed to represent, what are your thoughts on the current climate, the current projects, where we are today with cryptocurrency and blockchain technology versus where we were 3, 5, 7, 10 years ago?
I think there's been a big cultural shift. For one, I've been going to blockchain conferences since I think I started going to them. I mean, I used to go to meetups. Meetups were a thing I used to do in probably 14 and 15 quite a bit. But in 2017, I started going to more conferences, and like there was a marked shift in that era where you'd go to a conference and there'd be 30 different tokens that were all presenting, and it was pretty girls in tight dresses trying to get you to buy their ICO. And I was like, oh man, this is getting really weird for me. This isn't the revolution I was hoping for. Like, not
the Vegas events were very much like that.
Yeah. And like, I mean, that's all well and good. I'm not even criticizing them, but it was like Bitcoin was supposed to disrupt things that I cared about. I come at it from a sort of a worldview standpoint, like almost politics first, basically. Like we're trying to solve really deep fundamental issues with the economy with this tech, and ultimately fundraising is one of them. But then it became like the only thing is we're fundraising. It's a great fundraising tool, and so I was a little bummed by that. But I always like the ability to very trivially transact, low fees, like low friction, really useful wallets, that kind of stuff. And that's what led me into the Bitcoin Cash camp ultimately at the time. So I was a big fan of the Bitcoin Cash movement. like, hey, like this has to actually work for the world. Like you should be able to buy stuff with it. You need point of sale systems. You need wallets that work, this kind of thing. And I liked that. So they were like the last crew that was doing that. And then we ended up having our own block size debate basically between BCH and BSV. And since then, I think the biggest change is that everything kind of played into the BTC narrative really well with the pandemic. The notion is like the dollar is going to collapse, and this is something I agree with. But the way that it played out was, oh my God, the dollar is going to collapse now. Here's the inflation. Here's this thing we've been warning you about for a decade. Yeah. You need to be in BTC. This is what it's for. It's the Ron Paul meme, like it's happening, and like it just played perfectly into this narrative that pushed BTC from 2 years ago it was what, 3-4 grand, and then just blast off with the economy doing what it did. So it played into the hands of the global economy's collapsing, the dollar's collapsing, it's losing value, all these other things. You need to be in this asymmetric store of value, and that's great. I mean, it made a lot of us a lot of money, and that's excellent. But what loses on that narrative is this notion of a growing economy and a healthy economy and a tool that people can use in business. So people sort of lost that business mindset over the last 2 years. Everybody's like consolidating and filling the bunker. Like I need to make sure I'm safe. I'm not going to be investing in things that are going to require a lot of work. I'm trying to like shore up my castle. And that's a big cultural shift. And the people that did that were rewarded very, very handsomely for it. But the flip side of this, what I'm talking about with the just transactions or build your business on Bitcoin, like you need a Bitcoin that can do lots of transaction because you have a lot of business opportunity that can be unlocked with the technology. Well, then that hasn't played well. We've all been stuck in our homes, not sure if we're, is it going to be piles of bodies burning in the street because COVID is actually dangerous? And like, ultimately that didn't happen, at least not to the degree that a lot of people assumed that it might. But we had a big shift in culture and economics and a number of other things that has made it that people are, maybe we need to just keep getting ready for things to continue to collapse. And that's the thing, is that narrative is still playing out. So unfortunately for the people that want to build a disruptive business, it's really hard to calculate, like, what's the world going to look like in a year? We don't really know.
Right.
And so, that makes it difficult to start a business, and it makes it a lot more likely that people are going to save their money, or be a little more conservative about, all kinds of stuff with their finances. And again, that plays into the store of value narrative and all of that stuff. It also plays well into the DeFi thing. Like, hey, I'm going to sit, in my home. I'm gonna, like, board up the windows, but I'm still going to like be earning yield on Sushi Swap or whatever. And like, that's all well and good, but it's ultimately like, I really like economies that produce things. I'm impressed with entrepreneurs and inventors and people that are like doing incredible things. And like, while DeFi is an interesting tool, it's still just a variation. It's just a financial vehicle. And like, we know what these are. Like, these have existed for 100 years. It's just on a blockchain now. And therefore, like, slightly different, and allows you to do it, from your couch and in your pajamas, which is cool, but it's not the disruption that I'm looking forward to. So I feel very much like we've been in a weird holding pattern with what the technology is capable of, to the point that now most people in blockchain don't even realize that blockchains can do all these things they can do, because like, why would you look into it if you've made a ton of money doing nothing, right? Like,
and a lot of people just they really don't do their own research. Like you were saying, a lot of people just accept what someone who they think of as a thought leader or an influencer, because they said it's got to be true. So they gravitate towards those things. And yeah, if you actually do your own research and you start to really deep dive into a lot of these different projects and just these technologies in general, a lot of people's perspectives will change. And that's why, I thought this conversation would be a really fruitful conversation. Now, I guess to continue on with that question of what do you think about crypto today, is I'm thinking more as legacy finance and Wall Street and such, and even the banks trying to get themselves involved and implant themselves into the whole ecosystem with like digital currency group, where you can see even like Ethereum Enterprise Alliance, which involves some of the people involved with the DGC, which I mean, your MasterCard, your Visas, your Bank of Americas, your JP Morgans, your Citibanks, these institutions are all involved in what I'm talking about. So what are your thoughts on that element of crypto today?
I think it's terrible. I think it's an indication of having lost the plot. Like this was revolutionary stuff. This was supposed to be. I remember even just 5 or 6 years ago, the notion was Visa is going to run on Bitcoin because it's the most efficient technology. Now, I know this was debated. Small blockers would say, no, it was never meant to be that. But Satoshi talked about that very pointedly. Like, we can scale past Visa today. This was in 2009 he was talking. With existing hardware, no limitations. Like, we are going to replace these payment systems. Like, this should have put PayPal out of business, and Venmo should have never existed, and Visa and MasterCard should have been scrambling to be like, oh shoot, how can we retool our businesses to integrate not Bitcoin the way they've integrated them today, but how do we move our business onto the blockchain? And like, that's just a lost narrative anymore. Now you go to Bitcoin 2022 and it's sponsored by Cash App, and like, this is like, Cash App should have never been created as a company. Like, Bitcoin should have eliminated the business model that Cash App now fills. But now it's, wow, we're building Lightning Network Hub and all this stuff. Like, we're gonna make sure Bitcoin works if you use it through Cash App. And it's like, hold on, this is I don't want to use Cash App. Like, this is not the revolution here. Like, MasterCard and Visa and really all these payments companies, a lot of the commercial banks, most of the central bank, like a lot of this stuff, and these are people with trillions of dollars worth of money and power that obviously have been able to successfully steer the narrative into, this is just an asset. This is a store of value. You should be collateralizing your Ethereum in order to take out a loan for a mortgage. Isn't that disruptive? It's like, no, that's not disruptive. You can collateralize anything for a loan. That is not interesting. And, instead it should be like, shoot, I mean, Goldman Sachs just made an announcement with Coinbase and everybody's celebrating. It's like, I'm sorry, Goldman Sachs is arguably the worst company in existence. And we're supposed to celebrate that this is some kind of victory? Like, I am sorry, Goldman Sachs's involvement in collateralizing Bitcoin, BTC, whatever, is an indication of how hard we have been dropped to our knees and begging for scraps from the big banks. And we've gotten petty wealthy. Like, that's fine. I'll accept the fact that like we all got pretty wealthy off of all of this too. Like, that's all good. I'm happy for everybody that's done really well. But that's not what I was here for. Like, you could have done really well buying Tesla stock or Apple stock or whatever else. Like, that's not disruptive. You disrupted your portfolio, which is great for you, but we have done nothing to advance the cause of freedom. And we have done nothing to reduce the friction of global payments or to secure people's identity on the blockchain, real property rights on chain, real validation of all kinds of important things. And like, we need to not lose that battle. And like, we are seriously losing that battle today.
Well said. And yeah, I would agree with a lot of that. I really feel personally, and I've mentioned this a lot of times, that Bitcoin has been kept limited on purpose so that entities can profit off of creating solutions that are that they create. So it allows for centralization in aspects, and then it allows for them to profit, as I said, where they could just improve the code of Bitcoin. But there's no incentivization. All the developers, coders, they are volunteers basically. But a company like Blockstream or like Cash App will hire them and pay them to go ahead and work on these solutions, these workarounds, basically, and keeping Bitcoin limited on purpose, which kind of goes into what happened with Bitcoin Cash. Now, before we talk about that, a lot of things that we've mentioned and you talked about has gotten a negative light in the crypto media.
Yeah.
And the way that we're celebrating these Goldman Sachs partnerships. But if you look at who's in control of the majority of the crypto media, doesn't it make sense that that narrative is being pushed?
Oh, 100%.
It's just like our regular mainstream media.
Exactly right.
But just a crypto version.
Yep. Well, look at the big partners. Like look at the shareholders of Coinbase, for example. I mean, it's just like you look at the top
DGC,
10.
I think DGC is in there too.
They were
Digital Currency Group.
DGC was a major, or DCG, rather, Digital Currency Group. For those who don't know, I don't know how much you talk about it on your show, but yeah, Barry Silbert got together with guys from New York Life, Bain Capital. They got Larry Summers on their advisory board. Like Larry Summers, like a World Bank economist, and all of the, just these nonsense people who, like, why would we be taking advice from a Bitcoin incubator with these like lizards at the top of the chain, and like. And now they created Coinbase, Kraken, Abra Wallet. They own BitGo and Fireblocks. They own Blockstream. They own Lightning Labs. Like they own all of these brands. And like when they talk about, oh, we're disruptive and all this other nonsense, it's like, no, you're not. Like you're even in the same, like you have like BitPay, for example, is another portfolio company over at Digital Currency Group. And they were treated as like, oh, they're a big blocker group. But at the same time, like Blockstream and Lightning Labs are a small blocker group. And it's like, you look at the whole portfolio and who's advising them. And you start to see like, oh, okay, this is a bunch of bankers. This is world-class, like globalist financial titans playing both sides against the middle. So in my opinion, the entire scaling war was cloak and dagger. It was a bunch of, it was smoke and mirrors. Like all of it was nonsense. It was two groups of portfolio companies pretending to fight each other while the actual people were taking control by just making sure they patented all the right things. And like, look at MasterCard. MasterCard is the company that seeded and created Digital Currency Group. Mm-hmm. And so MasterCard today owns the most patents on central bank digital currency technology. And so this is a perfect, 10-year plan. You get some planner at MasterCard who says, okay, this blockchain thing is pretty interesting. How do we issue the CBDCs on some private chain that we control and is patented by us, so we make a cut of every transaction? But the first thing is we got to make sure that like this Bitcoin thing doesn't do it first. Like we don't want it to be a decentralized token on a decentralized network, because how the hell do we profit from that?
Right.
And not only that, but it disrupts MasterCard. MasterCard would have lost market share, stock value, etc., if Bitcoin was allowed to scale as originally implemented. And so it's this twofold, like, okay, keep Bitcoin in a really little box, but also work on our offensive patent strategy. And we get to be professional blockchain and we get to make all this money. And it's easy for them to make a deal with the Federal Reserve or whoever else. And so this should be expected. Like this isn't even conspiracy theory stuff. Like you can look up, like, when did MasterCard create Digital Currency Group? You can just Google that. There's financials, there's articles. It was debated at the time. People were worried about it at the time, and now they act like it didn't happen. And it's just outrageous.
It's because Digital Currency Group kind of got control of the media, so it was really easy to kind of put those stories under the rug.
Correct. So they own CoinDesk. So CoinDesk is like the news outlet for the general blockchain economy, but they're a portfolio company again of Digital Currency Group, and that's a big problem. But it's exactly how things work. What's that?
Is Cointelegraph involved with
Telegraph? Is not
Digital Currency
I think last I checked, and it's been a while, but Cointelegraph was always owned by some anonymous party, and I don't remember. Like, in my opinion, that means probably owned by the same people. But
that's why I was curious.
But we don't know.
I mean, they seem to push out a really similar narrative.
Yes.
And where I was asking a question earlier about CoinGeek being exclusively BSV, Bitcoin Satoshi Vision, because these other media outlets, they don't cover BSV. They put Craig Wright in the most negative light that they could, and before that I saw them do the same thing to Roger Ver.
Yeah.
a Bitcoin Jesus, who they basically crucified and turned into Bitcoin Judas, all through their media push, which is real interesting. So if we go back to 2017, the Civil War time period that took place, it was a hard fork from Bitcoin. First time this took place, and it's what gave birth to Bitcoin Cash because of a disagreement between core developers and community members, I'm assuming. Miners, I don't know, but it was about block size. It was about increasing the block size. And then there was just big arguments about why one side says yes and one side says no. And think of it as a train track that just splits. And you have two different tokens now that have the same originating chain, but split off at some point. And then fast forward later on, same thing happened with Bitcoin Cash, which created BSV. But we'll keep it to the original standpoint. What was the big debate about big block versus small block? So for somebody who doesn't really understand this.
Sure. So in a very basic sense, it's about how many transactions that you can put on the network at a time. On BTC, there is a limit of at its very best, 7 transactions a second globally. So that's about 6 megabytes of data per hour. And the BTC people, the small blockers, would have you believe that if there is more than 6 megabytes per hour broadcast across the network, that it will make the operation of a full node too expensive and the node count will fall off, which will make it less decentralized. And that's it. That's their whole position. The big blockers look at it and say, 6 megabytes an hour is a really small amount of money, especially for people in the Bitcoin economy who have made a ton of money and can afford hard drive space. And therefore, it would make more sense for people to be able to have lower fees and not only just lower, but also predictable fees per transaction so that they can know how much of Bitcoin is spendable when you have it. Because it's a problem. If you only have $15 worth of Bitcoin, but the price to transact it is $8 one day and $2 another and 30 cents the other, and then maybe the price to spend it is $50 like it was at the end of 2017, well, you don't have any money at that point. It costs more money to use the network than the money that you have. And so the big blockers looked at it and said, look, Satoshi, if you read the introduction to the white paper, was very clear that Bitcoin was intended to disrupt commerce on the internet. This is the opening phrase of the introduction paragraphs. Commerce on the internet, ... And he goes on to explain a friction problem in payments. He specifically says small casual payments a couple of times in the white paper as he's explaining this ability to undercut existing payment fees, which at the time was credit cards and PayPal. Now, I don't know anybody that looks at PayPal. You can't do like under a $5 charge on your credit card as a rule. A lot of small businesses won't let you charge less than $5 or $10 because the fees are too high. And so Big Blocker said, yeah, we need to keep fees low. If fees are low, then people will use the network, and use of the network pays miners to continue to mine the network. And when you make it profitable to mine, more miners join the network. And so there's a lot of politics around like who is a node and who governs the network and what does it mean to be an operator. Can we trust miners is a weird one in my opinion, but they trust a collective, a group of people running nodes who don't or can't mine blocks are somehow innately more trustworthy than people who can mine blocks with their nodes. And this is some commie nonsense in my opinion. So, and like, you look at a guy and say, the fact that you mine blocks makes you suspect. Really, it's class warfare kind of stuff. And so, if you read the intro, here you go. Commerce on the internet has come to rely almost exclusively on financial institutions serving as trusted third parties. But Satoshi goes in to talk about, like, I think it's probably the 4th line or 5th line here, possibility for small casual transactions. Like he's talking about this ability for you to make small, trivial payments. This is buying a cup of coffee, spending $3. Maybe, I mean, how small is a small casual payment? In fact, Satoshi told us. He's like, imagine being able to put a couple of tokens in a slot machine or onto an adult website, or to send an email. Satoshi talked about pay to send email built on top of Bitcoin. And so these things are all like big problems. I mean, think about spam just as a problem. Email spam causes all kinds of issues for people. Well, imagine if you could set your mailbox to, I am not willing to accept any email for less than a penny. You have to put a penny in.
Right.
I mean, that just kills spam right there.
That'd be
and
a
you
nice
can make
spam
it like,
blocker.
look, I will read your email within 30 minutes if you send it with $10. Like,
incentivize them.
Right. Like, we just fixed the whole problem of email spam, email marketing, like Nigerian prince scammers and all of this stuff. We got rid of all of it. This is a problem that Bitcoin was designed to fix. Satoshi told us how to fix it. And within 3 or 4 years of that, you had people saying, Bitcoin's not for that. Bitcoin is a store of value. If you spend your Bitcoin for anything, you're just losing money. Like, so don't think about business applications. Don't think about the things that Bitcoin disrupt. Think about the fiat money that you will have if you do nothing with your Bitcoin. And that's really easy for people. It's a really good sales tactic. Do nothing, get rich anyways. So that's what we're competing with. And that's obviously a seductive narrative to the kind of people who don't want to work. And like, everybody wants to take a break, but somebody's got to do the work. And that applies to the Bitcoin economy just as much as anywhere else.
Yeah, because if we think about like a socialist or communist type society, there's not really any incentivization to create and build. And if we go in the direction that we're heading in, where people don't want to work, eventually all the non-work is going to start piling up to the point that it's going to be like, well, someone needs to do this stuff. So I get what you're saying. And obviously, a lot of what transpired over the past few years due to the pandemic and economics, they've had what they want to use as excuses for putting us in a further deep situation, which is interesting because, again, that's what Bitcoin was ultimately created for. As far as the white paper came out Halloween of 2008, and the first block was mined January 3rd of 2009. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. So, and the reason for it was out of the ashes of what we experienced in 2008. And obviously, there was lots of innovative, creative cypherpunks, geniuses, coders, starting with people like David Chaum. David Chaum, I don't know how much you know about him. Do you know?
A bit.
Okay. I'm trying to interview him. I had a couple interviews scheduled and they got canceled. Yeah. He's supposed to be at Consensus. I've been hearing has some health issues. I'd like to memorialize.
He's getting up in years. Yeah.
Yeah. The godfather of cryptography. It's interesting to think that in 82 or 83, he wrote a dissertation paper that included all but one element that was used in the Bitcoin white paper. And this is before like really the internet was available publicly.
Yeah, the dude's a ninja.
Yeah, pretty wild to think about. And then all the other different individuals that came before that. But a lot of it that I felt was what was the message that was written in the very first Genesis block?
So the Times, which is the most read London newspaper, chancellor on the brink of second bailout for banks. Right. And
so that should give an indication of why Bitcoin was created, if you think about it.
So I think so. This is funny. People bring this up, and what you're saying is maybe not untrue, but it's everybody says this. But I want to wind people back a little bit and think about Satoshi actually told us that he was working on Bitcoin for about 2 years before it was released, which means he would have been working on it in 2006, basically 2006 and 2007, which were huge, and nobody was talking about a housing collapse in 2006 and 7. So Bitcoin was being created as a payments protocol, and I think Satoshi really just wanted to disrupt payments, and I think he got maybe lucky or maybe unlucky, depending on how you feel about the direction that Bitcoin has gone, that as it was released, that this housing market bubble burst at the same time. Now, it did get eyes on Bitcoin, and so that's a good thing. But I think it got eyes on Bitcoin for reasons that maybe Satoshi didn't care about that much. Like, he clearly did care about like debasement of currency and the stuff. He did talk about these things, but ultimately, I think that like the Times article and some of this stuff, like it may have just been as arbitrary as a timestamp to let people know that I didn't mine a block before this date, and the proof is the headline from the Times. So there was no pre-mine, and you can know that because of this. But if you actually read the article is not really a criticism of bailouts. It's actually more of a it's pretty positive about like, hey, don't worry, everything's going to be good. Chancellor's bailing out the banks, and so people mention that, and I always sort of point out, like, we assume that because when Bitcoin came out, that this was what was on everybody's mind, Lehman Brothers, and just all of this, the housing collapse and all of that. But like, this is a perspective thing that might be wrong. Like,
I mean, that's an interesting perspective. I haven't read enough of the writings of Satoshi and conversations beyond the white paper to really grasp anything beyond it.
Sure.
I will admit I never bothered to look up that article, never even thought about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm thinking how much I haven't done with some of my research when I'm thinking about that in retrospect.
Yeah.
But
well, here's the thing: people don't. I forget what they call the experiment about the monkeys, but they put a bunch of monkeys in a room and they punish them for doing some specific thing about sharing food.
It's on like the tip of my tongue, the experiment.
Yeah, I forget what they call it, but what they do is they start with, let's say it's five monkeys, and they make them share food, but then they punish one of them for the way that he shares the food, and like his behavior changes. But then you start removing the apes and replacing them with new apes, and so the new apes only see the behavior of the social engineered ape, and within whatever it is,
Harlow's something.
The Harlow ape experiment, is that what it is?
Harry Harlow monkey experiment.
Okay, yes.
There's another word for
it. I believe that is the one. And so what it was is within just a few hours, they could just leave it, and the apes were punishing each other for a behavior. So it's like they all just agree, this is the way we behave. This is the way we were taught to behave. And like, it's the same thing. Like, you can question, like, what is history? You can look at, like, why did World War II start? Like, well, Pearl Harbor got bombed. And it's like, yeah, but what was before that? And what was before that? And what was before? And you can go back to, you can go back up to 1,000 years of history between Japan and the rest of the world and all this stuff. Like, why did Japan hook up with Germany in World War II? Like, well, that's an interesting story. And so, like, you can keep going back on this stuff. And like, people don't do that with Bitcoin because, first of all, who's got the time, right? But if you actually look at it, who started the conversation about, oh, this is a protest against the big banks? Well, of course, people feel like it's a protest against the big banks. We were all broke. The big banks screwed us in 2008. But Satoshi, he never talked about it. In fact, he even criticized Gavin Andresen at his last email. The last thing he ever said to Gavin, he handed Gavin the keys to the Bitcoin Core repo and said, Gavin, you're in charge now. Please stop talking about me as a shadowy figure. I'm not interested in this being dark web cash. Please stop talking about Silk Road. Don't give donations to WikiLeaks. So like, Satoshi, people talk about him being a cypherpunk, and it was like, he really, on his way out, slapped Gavin on the wrist and said, don't treat me like an internet criminal. Like, talk about disruptive business. Congratulate your developers. That was something that he said. Like, be proud of the development work you're doing, but stop trying to treat this like crime money. So this was his criticism on the way out the door, and like, people look at, like, you'll watch any documentary about Bitcoin and they're like, oh, well, then the Silk Road happened and this created this wonderful use case for Bitcoin. Or then WikiLeaks got censored and this created this wonderful use for Bitcoin, showing that Bitcoin is good at censorship resistant commerce, which it is. It is good for those things.
Yeah.
But Satoshi, the creator of Bitcoin, literally was saying, I really wish you wouldn't use it for this nonsense. This is going to give Bitcoin a reputation that I don't want it to have. It's a simple payments technology, and it's X, it's Y, but it's not this thing. But like, that's the prevailing narrative about Bitcoin today, is that it is definitely for subversive, political commerce. And like,
Yeah.
I get that. I'm also a libertarian. Like, these are things that I like about Bitcoin too. But like, you need to take a step back and say,
it's interesting to think about those perspectives.
Yeah, like, what are we missing? Like, what did Satoshi want us to do? Like, nobody thinks to ask the creator, right?
Now, I've heard the negative things of, well, who is the creator? And we'll get into that.
There
But
you go.
the negative things about Silk Road and stuff I've heard. But as far as Satoshi exiting, didn't somebody who was a developer communicate it with Satoshi in contact with either FBI or CIA, some government alphabet agency?
Gavin, who I mentioned, yeah, he had a sit down with the CIA, and
that's about the same time period he bounced Satoshi
right around that era. Yes.
Okay.
So Gavin, it's interesting. A lot of people had relationships with Satoshi too. I mean, Satoshi was really active on the forums for 2 years. Like, he was very happy to answer questions, and he would argue, like, here's why blocks shouldn't be faster. Here's why proof of stake sucks. Here's all the, like, he was very, very happy to chat. There's even conversations with guys like Dan Larimer, who created like delegated proof of stake, like the EOS blockchain and Steemit and BitShares and some of this other stuff that like are really popular. Like, the Dan Larimer notion of blockchains is a very popular notion today. And it is, you're muted. It is too.
I didn't know that they communicated. Dan Larimer and Satoshi?
Absolutely.
Okay, because I know Larimer's kind of a libertarian-minded.
He is.
Anarchist. He actually identifies as an anarchist.
Absolutely.
And a project jumper, but
very much so. But here's the thing. The famous quote from Satoshi saying, if you don't get it, I don't have time to explain it to you. Sorry. That is a famous quote. That is one of the most often quoted Satoshi quotes. And that was to Dan Larimer. It was Satoshi telling Dan Larimer, you don't get it, dude. And I'm not explaining it to you again. And Dan literally like just kind of left butthurt. He was like, well, I don't think you get it, Satoshi, basically. And he licked his wounds a little bit and came back and sort of said, okay, I guess I see what you're saying with X, but whatever. But these things are super fascinating when you read Satoshi talking about just all kinds of stuff. And censorship resistance is another one. Like, Satoshi, they were talking about like how to deal with theft. Like, how many blocks should we wait before you leave the store? That kind of thing. Or how do we do escrow? Like, how can I pay somebody in Bitcoin, but then they have to ship me something? Like, how do I know I'm going to get my thing? Or how do I get my money back if I don't get my thing? And so like the developers were debating like, you create a smart contract that does escrow and this and that. And Satoshi said, why don't we make it like if gold could turn to lead and then turn back to gold again? And everyone's like, what do you mean? He's like, well, what if you could paint your coin? What if like you could give somebody gold and it's gold in their hand, but if they screw you, the gold turns to lead. But then if they make you whole again, it turns back to gold again. It's an alchemy, that thing. And people are like, well, how could you do that with Bitcoin? He was, and the Satoshi was just very coy. He was like, never mind, But it was like him giving this hint, and it's like, okay, well, is that something that Bitcoin is capable of doing? And like, there was the thing called the alert key. Like, Satoshi had a key to be able to send an RPC message to every node on the network to coordinate everybody. Like, hey, as the honest nodes of the network, here was a theft, for example. Like, if somebody said, shoot, I just got robbed. Here's my wallet. Here's the hash of my transaction. The guy never sent my thing. Technically, the nodes on the network can move that if every node agrees, they can move a transaction back. They can essentially do a reverse transaction.
So that kills the immutability, right?
Yeah.
But I guess it's already been kind of killed on Bitcoin.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. It's like,
it's interesting how they talk about Bitcoin being immutable, but there's been incidences where they've had to change things. So
yeah, whoops, we're gonna roll back half a day. No problem.
Yeah, because there was the inflation bug and all these other things. And I guess also before the hash war, were you involved at the same time period as deeply, well, as interested as you are today in regards to when Vitalik was trying to introduce some of the concepts that ultimately became Ethereum to the Bitcoin network?
I was so that all kind of happened right in my time period where I was getting married, like late 2014 into a lot of 2015. I
Okay.
was like, I got married that year and a bunch
I
of
was
stuff. I
just
was not doing a lot of Bitcoin.
Now, from a historical standpoint, though, have you gone back and looked at
Oh
it?
yeah.
What
No,
are your thoughts
Vitalik's
on that?
he was a very interesting character. I mean, I I think he made what looked like a good faith uh, attempt at keeping Bitcoin scaling, like use Bitcoin script, do smart contracts on chain. And actually, a lot of this stuff already existed. Like you can look at like counterparty token
Yeah,
protocol,
they
for example.
counterparty and colored tokens,
Yeah, colored coins. Yeah, like
colored
that kind
coins,
of stuff is all like Bitcoin could do smart contracts and tokens and DAOs and all
which
this
were
other stuff.
basically like what we would think of as like ERC20 tokens.
Basically.
Yeah, for
And
Ethereum.
like Vitalik, poked at it and was critical and, we should do X. But I think he always wanted to do Ethereum. Like it was in his mind that was the direction he wanted to go anyways, which, Ethereum is not just different. It's very fundamentally different. Like it works in a very, very different way from Bitcoin. And at the time made it a lot easier. Like it's super easy to program a smart contract on Ethereum. Like that's what's cool about ETH, but they don't scale. Like as people are well aware of now, like you try to send me $1,000 in USDC right now today, probably cost you $20. Like
Yeah, it depends. Yeah, it
transaction.
depends on the congestion of the network and
Exactly.
what's going on. If
some days it's $500. We just saw last week during the Bored Ape Yacht Club mint, it was like $1,000 a transaction.
Yeah.
So, Ethereum doesn't scale. So Vitalik did some interesting things. I mean, he's a brilliant programmer and all this other stuff, but Ethereum is, economically and architecturally not a very good idea. He gets a lot of credit because a lot of people made a lot of money. And that's all well and good. If I was a VC that bought ETH at, $1, yeah, I'm gonna feel great about Ethereum because I don't really care. I'm not trying to use it for anything. But yeah, I don't know. Vitalik's an interesting character in the history of Bitcoin, and he's smart enough to know that Bitcoin was capable of smart contracts that could scale. And it's funny because he's even admitted in public. He was on stage with Joe Lubin, who's another one of the
from Consensus.
Yeah, they were on stage
of JP Morgan's and all that good stuff.
Joe admitted on stage with Vitalik, like, yeah, we knew Ethereum couldn't scale when we launched it, but we knew that if we launched it, it would probably make us a lot of money, and we could afford the research and development to launch ETH2, which can scale. And it's like, Joe, that's investment fraud. Like you can't tell people it does one thing in order to raise money and then use that money to try to actually fulfill your first promise. Like,
right.
That's just plainly dishonest.
Yeah, because that would go against what the SEC has said with Ethereum not being a security.
Yeah, 100%.
I would obviously put it in the category of that's interesting to think about. Now, do you think that Ethereum is too big to fail because of everything that's involved?
I don't think anything is too big to fail. I mean, like people say the same thing about BTC, like Kurt, that ship has sailed, and it's like, dude, I used to use Yahoo every day. Before that, I used AOL every day. Like, I'm sorry, like really big ships absolutely sink. And, a lot of it has to do with bad economics, bad management, and people that have too big of an ego to say, we really need to pivot here. And if they don't pivot, all of a sudden you get your Netscapes eat your lunch, and then your Internet Explorers. Now, everything's Google. And like, what's the next one? Like looking at BTC and Ethereum, it's like, wow, they're blue chip cryptos or whatever. And it's like, they don't work. They don't do the thing that they claim that they do. Like, that's it. That's the whole conversation.
Right. Now, you feel that BSV does what the white paper and what Satoshi talked about originally creating and developing?
Yes. Full stop.
Okay. Now to rewind to why were you on board to the Civil War time period back in summer of 2017? Why were you on the side of Bitcoin Cash during the Civil War debate?
Long story short, I've read every word Satoshi Nakamoto ever said about Bitcoin. Satoshi was a big blocker. He was a little, Satoshi was not 100% on narrative at all times. He has said things that play into the small blockers narrative a little bit. But if you look at the way that he talked about Bitcoin, like how should Bitcoin should end up in data centers with giant server farms. Like people running their own node is not the design of the network. It's nice now, but nodes are going to consolidate into professional businesses, data centers, farms. He specifically said GPU farms and all this other stuff. And
now, is that because the idea is that the blocks would scale up and that the data for the entire blockchain going back to the entire history to run it on a node would be way too much resources on the everyday computer?
Yes. He even criticized, he said it would be like everyone running their own email server. That doesn't make any sense. So when people say oh, you need to run your own node to be sovereign, like Satoshi specifically said, I do not want groups of people to be able to run their own node. He criticized that notion, and they talk about it as if, oh, this is the gift Satoshi gave us. It's like, no, it's not. In fact, he made fun of you and then scolded you for it, and now you've rewritten history. And so for me, looking at Bitcoin Cash's at the time, their scaling model, yeah, big blocks make a lot of sense. I've been a Bitcoiner for years at this point. I can afford some hard drives. This is such a bizarre concept that people who have gotten extremely rich on Bitcoin can't afford a server to make Bitcoin scale up because that's going to oppress people in some way. But then also ignore the fact that poor people can't afford the transaction fees. That's irrelevant.
Right.
So it's just, for me, it was so crystal clear that was Satoshi's vision, to scale Bitcoin on chain, his fundamental design. He even said that Bitcoin at version 0.1 is essentially set in stone for the rest of its life. How could that be any more clear? Don't change the protocol. That's it. And well, maybe he meant no, set in stone is about as hard a stamp you can put on it. So
yeah.
No,
I would agree. Now, when the fork took place, what ended up being the block size on Bitcoin BTC, and then the block size on Bitcoin Cash BCH?
So BCH had a protocol level 8 megabyte block size limit. So every 10 minutes, you could put 8 megabytes worth of transactions through the network. And then on BTC, for all intents and purposes, it's 1 megabyte. But what SegWit does is creates a bunch of extra calculations, and it consolidates signatures into a hash. And so you can technically fit, if everything was flawless, you could maybe fit 4 megabytes worth of transactions, but not the signatures. So you get a hash of signatures. It's sort of an incomplete. That's what SegWit means, is segregated witness. So it's sort of we're segregating the signatures, but we have this hash that acts as an attestation that the signatures exist. And that's much easier to transact. So you could get to about 4 megabytes, a little less than 4 megabytes a block on BTC today, even if everything is perfect. Now, we have never seen a block that big on BTC. Most are between 1 and 2 megabytes.
Right.
And so that's because you have the option to use SegWit or not, but there's still that protocol level 1 megabyte limit. And on Bitcoin Cash today has had one major upgrade since then. So it's a 32 megabyte block size limit. But block size limits, it's still, that is a protocol level, developer chosen block size limit. You can only compete up to X amount of megabytes. On BSV, there's no block size limit.
And are they every 10 minutes?
They're every 10 minutes. Everything else about it is very much, it's Bitcoin. It is the original Bitcoin protocol restored, but I run Gorilla Pool. It's a BSV pool. I am willing to accept 10 gigabyte blocks. So if you send me a 10 gigabyte block, I'll validate it. That's fine. Pay me. Why not? And I will try to mine, we have our mining limit at 4 gigabytes because I don't know that we can propagate more than that fast enough to the rest of the network because I don't think they're ready for it. But if somebody wants to do it, I'll accept up to 10. And this is a decision that should be made at that level, right? Like,
Right.
I'm the node operator. It's up to me in my business to decide. Now, let's say I get a big client. Let's say ExxonMobil wants to put all of their global gasoline shipment records on chain. And every time they hit a checkpoint, that's a transaction. And let's say I have 1 billion transactions a week. Well, then that allows me as a sovereign individual to call the other miners on the network and say, hey guys, I got a lot more transactions coming over the next few weeks and they're just going to grow forever. We really need to work some stuff out. Can we connect via like direct API and like we'll all agree to raise our accepted block size limit to like 100 gigs? Well, yeah, there's money to go around. And so the answer is yes. and rather than having to have a protocol war, it's between simply the people who run the nodes to say, yeah, we'll change our limits or not. You don't have to accept my block either. And
So
that's fine.
is there a block limitation on BSV?
No.
So it's just set to however high it gets. What is the highest
settings?
What is the highest or the largest block that has been mined on BSV?
So my pool, Gorilla Pool, actually mined the biggest block, and it was 1 kilobyte less than 4 gigabytes. So we mined it. It had about our biggest block had over 2.5 million transactions in it. And that is comes out to about 4,000 transactions a second. That is compared to BTC, which is 7 transactions a second, or BCH was about 150 to 200 a second. We did 4,000 per second. By comparison, this would be like Ethereum is good for about 15 transactions a second, or you can look at Polygon, which might be good for maybe 1,000 transactions a second. And so we are basically orders of magnitude more scalable today than the other blockchains, doing nothing but a re-implementation of what Satoshi Nakamoto implemented in 2009. And so, we're proving every day that not only was this conversation about these things are impossible, but they are absolutely doable. It's profitable to mine. It's a good time. So, we like, you can see the businesses we support, for example. If you scroll down a little bit, like these are companies that are mentioned. These are companies that use BSV because they have more data to put to the network than any other network would allow. Like, each of these companies could not exist on another blockchain. So there are business models out there that should be on BTC. Everything should be. Everything on Ethereum, everything on Solana, everything on Polygon, everything on Avalanche. Those should be Bitcoin businesses, but they're not. We're all spread out because we couldn't agree that Bitcoin was capable.
Right.
And that really sucks.
Well, and I do want to, I told you privately, I do want to interview Craig Wright. And I would like to have more conversations with you and go a little bit more in depth about BSV specifically and kind of keep it more tightly focused on BSV. Talk about some of the different applications and stuff that run on it. But one thing that I heard recently, and I may be mistaken, but correct me if I'm wrong. It was an interview, I think, on Kitco News with Craig Wright, where he was making a statement of something to the effect of every blockchain could run on BSV and not congest the network.
Correct. That was absolutely what he said.
And do you find validity in that statement?
100%. Because here's the thing. For me, like, as a pool operator, I have to make money, right? But I make money by providing access to the blockchain, that data. I'm writing data to the blockchain, which I can then resell back to the economy for profit, right? Now, let's say Ethereum right now with its 15 transactions a second, but everybody wants to keep their holdings, right? And in fact, we've already seen this. We see like wrapped BTC sitting on Ethereum, right? Or we see wrapped ETH sitting on all kinds of other chains. On Solana is a good example. There's a lot of wrapped tokens on Solana because Solana is more scalable than Ethereum. It still has its limits.
Centralized as hell.
Yeah.
No wonder that's a blockchain trilemma that we talk about with it's security, scalability, and decentralization. And usually you have to sacrifice one of the three, and most times that's the decentralization. And if you could turn your blockchain off, that should also be an indication that it's not decentralized either.
Right. Anatoly needs to be
I
woken
mean,
up
even
out
if
of bed.
all the nodes agree that, yes, let's turn it off, that's still centralized.
Yeah, it's a problem. So
sorry, I had to rant on Solana for a second.
No, that's all right. And so this is actually not even a contentious thing. Like there's wrapped tokens on other networks right now. So let's say you wrapped all your BTC holdings, you tokenized them on BSV, and you got to redeem your keys with your BTC keys on BSV, and your BTC is now a token on BSV. Done. End of story. Not a reason to mine another BTC block ever again. That's it. That's the whole conversation. And it's the same thing with ETH and everything else. Like you can get your holdings, you can transact them. So BSV is capable. I mentioned like my biggest fastest block. These were between 4,000 and 5,000 transactions a second. That's a lot, but it's not huge. In testing environment, which we run multiple test nets and try these things out, we look more than capable. 50,000 transactions a second, no problem. 100,000 transactions a second, we've seen it done in the test environment. That's when the wheels start to shake a little bit with the current implementation. This is with the reference client. However, again, we have protocol developers that work for our pool, and then there's teams that are working on like, okay, how can we do this node better? And because we have this incentive to compete to make it work better, there's no protocol level limit. The protocol doesn't say how much data we can put across the network. So what are our limitations? It's connectivity, it's computation. How much time does it take to validate the block? So it's like, okay, well, that's an efficiency thing. I can keep adding CPU and RAM and gigabits per second connectivity, but then also like I can make the software more and more efficient. Maybe I rewrite it in Rust because Rust is just a more efficient piece of software to run it in. So now I get more per computation. Maybe I break things out and I use machine acceleration on just the UTXO set or just on the mempool or thing. So there's lots of ways where you can break out the node and like there's not a reason it can't be 1 million or 1 billion transactions a second. Like these are computation problems that have actually already been solved by the internet. Like people use these technologies to communicate right now. I mean, we're streaming video to each other. This is incredible. Right. Like,
but also during 2020, when a lot of people were quarantining and most people were at home, we started seeing, because there's a big argument about scaling crypto and blockchains, but the internet's not quite 100% scaled because we were starting to see issues with degradation of services,
Sure.
not doing 4K video because of too much internet congestion.
Sure.
Did you notice the same thing?
No, absolutely. I mean,
so yeah, I just find that fascinating when we're bringing out that argument about a technology that utilizes the internet when we need to be worrying about the scaling of the internet.
We need to be replacing the internet. And that's another thing that Bitcoin, like I think Bitcoin miners, the nodes on the network, we should think of them like ISPs. We should be thinking of them like we think of Verizon and Comcast and AT&T and some of these companies today. Like these are the data centers of the network who are incentivized to make the network better. Like Bitcoin is a lower friction, higher value technology than all these existing things. Like it's only from 2008. Like the internet is from the 70s. And people are, Bitcoin can't scale. And it's like, well, what do you think? Like there were no lessons learned there. So
good points.
There are ways to make terabyte blocks, millions or billions of transactions a second. You just have to be willing to do it. But Bitcoin scales horizontally. It's just like the internet does, really. Like you have a big video game launch or like Black Friday payments, right? What does Visa do on Black Friday? They buy more server space. They rent it and it's ready to rock and roll on Black Friday. Well, Bitcoin scales the exact same way. Throw more compute at it and it will eat more transactions. That's it.
Okay. No, it makes a lot of sense. And if would you be up for having another conversation soon about like a BSV focused episode?
Anytime,
kind
man.
of do a deeper dive into that, get your perspective on the whole proof of work versus proof of stake. And
I would love to.
what I'd like to do with the rest of our time, if you don't mind, is kind of like take it to the Satoshi Nakamoto element, since we've been kind of talking about that.
Sure.
Obviously, I have a good inclination of who you think Satoshi Nakamoto is, but I will say, based off of looking at your, I'm going to make sure I pull it up correctly, so bear with me 1 second. But your articles over on CoinGeek with your fake Toshi series, I'm just going to do a screen share so we can safely assume here that Adam Back, Nick Szabo, and was there another one?
Not yet. I got Hal Finney coming up next.
Okay, so Hal Finney will be in part 3. So we can assume that none of those 3 are who you think Satoshi Nakamoto is.
Correct.
Now, I've got an interesting theory that I talked about with an anonymous analyst named Mr. A, who works with Crypto Vigilante, about another individual who I don't know you may have come across, but who in your opinion is Satoshi Nakamoto? And actually, hold on before you answer that. What are your thoughts about people thinking that the government was involved with this, the NSA, the FBI, the CIA, whatever the case might be, even with the NSA having a white paper come out in the 90s called How to Mint. What's his name? David Schwartz from Ripple was working for the NSA and as a cryptographer. He was there at that same time period. So I'm not saying that David Schwartz is Satoshi, but just the whole idea that people say that Bitcoin was created by the government.
It's an interesting. I actually think it's not entirely false, as I understand it. Now, some of this stuff is very deep in the cloak and dagger. This is like talking definitively about like, here's how the CIA functions. It's like, are we
like
ever
you got really... you got the handbook and you're going to be sharing all the secret information with
exactly
us,
right. Like, hey, here's where the bodies are buried. Here's where the aliens are. Like, no problem. So it's a little bit one of those stories. So there's a little bit of like, there's some stuff where you have to fill in the blanks, but something like Bitcoin, like, did the government invent Bitcoin? I mean, the NSA created the SHA-256 hashing algorithm. Government contractors created a lot of the cryptography tools. You got guys like Ralph Merkle and some of these guys that created some of the predicate technology. Like, who did they work for? Well, I mean, when you're a high-level cryptographer and computer science guy, even Alan Turing, he basically invented the field of computer science, and like, he invented it for the British military. And so does that mean, I mean, did the Queen of England invent Bitcoin? I mean, so things like that,
right.
Like, yes and no. I mean, look at even who the cypherpunks are. Cypherpunks, as a rule, are people that worked for like big banks, big intelligence, 3-letter agencies and stuff as their day job. But they were libertarian activists, anarchist activists and stuff at night, which is why they would use an alias or a pseudonym and like, hey man, we need to burn this thing down, right? So
right.
There's a lot of stuff like that where it's like, I don't know, or is this a good guy or a bad guy? And that really comes as a matter of perspective on a lot of things. So I think I should answer your question about.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and let you answer. I just want to throw in the little government thing because I meant to ask that earlier.
Well, and this is why it's interesting. So I believe that within an order of magnitude that Satoshi Nakamoto is Dr. Craig Wright. And so the reason I say within an order of magnitude is because it's kind of like asking who built Notre Dame Cathedral, right?
Right, because it wasn't one individual. It was probably a team, and there was probably some hired manual labor, but one architect might get credit.
Exactly. Now this is the example I always bring up. You remember the architect of a famous building, but you don't remember the names of the bricklayers and the plumbers and the plaster guys and the guys that did the electrical. And like, those people are all going to be forgotten. And it's really sad because they're crucial people. but you're never going to know their names. And the architect gets this credit. Oh, I have built the building. And so in Bitcoin, I believe that essentially Craig Wright wrote the Bitcoin white paper, which is to say that he came up with the idea that is Bitcoin. Now, did Craig Wright code it all up? Did he do all the implementation stuff? Was it even entirely Craig Wright communicating as Satoshi Nakamoto in emails and forums and on SourceForge commits and all these other things? I don't think so. I think it was some. Craig is, despite criticisms to the contrary, Craig is a capable academic coder in the C++ language. He was a college professor at Charles Sturt University, where he taught C++ for supercomputing. He also owned the largest cybersecurity firm in Australia, a company called Hotwire PE, doing digital forensics and other things. He was also a video game programmer. But back in the day, in the 2006 and 7 and 8 era, Craig worked for, as a contractor, a company called Lassiter's Casino.
Yeah, I thought he was involved in gambling at some point.
Mm-hmm. And so Lassiter's Casino wanted to bring their casino onto the internet and accept international payments and some of these other things. And Craig was working there and created some systems that were relevant to that. Now, one of the things that a lot of people don't know about the original implementation of Bitcoin is that when it was released, there was some vestigial code for a poker game that ended up in the client. And Satoshi very quietly removed it without telling anybody. He just patched it. I'm going to get rid of that. The reason why is because it is a piece of evidence as to who Satoshi Nakamoto is. It was somebody working on casino software. And so Satoshi Nakamoto, as I understand it, and I've done quite a bit of digging, it really looks like it was code that was created by one of Craig Wright's companies for Lassiter's Casino that ended up in the Bitcoin code. And nobody else has any answer for it. Everybody says, I don't know, maybe he just wanted to program a thing and whatever. Like, no, I think very clearly it looks like this was code that was proposed to Lassiter's that ended up in Bitcoin because Satoshi was actually a pretty sloppy coder, like not a bad coder, but a sloppy coder, which a lot of coders are. This is why you have people that check your work and that kind of thing.
People who audit your codes.
Yeah, I mean, book authors have editors too,
right? Review it. Yeah, I get you.
Yep. So that's a really good example that people like to write off and say like, who was writing casino software in 2006 and 7 who could have been involved in Bitcoin and who wrote in C++ and who used British idioms? Well, Craig Wright is Australian. He has incredible cybersecurity pedigree, and he was a contractor for the largest casino in that hemisphere, and also working on ways for Lassiter's specifically for accepting international payments in a way that got around the law. And so it's like, more and more it starts to fit this profile. But also, Bitcoin isn't just tech. Bitcoin is really a lot of copy and pasted ideas in total. I mentioned he didn't create SHA-256. He didn't create Merkle trees. He didn't create public key cryptography. He didn't create any of this stuff. So what did Satoshi Nakamoto actually do? He created game theory, not the field of game theory. He created the game theory of Bitcoin. And so that gets back to, okay, so you need to understand macroeconomics. You need to understand psychology. You need to understand, applied cryptography and math. Well, if you look at Craig's accolades, like Craig is a polymath among these things. Like Craig is a math expert. I'm talking doctorate level, like academic math expert. He's a computer science doctor, but he also has doctorates in economics and law and philosophy and all these other things that would allow him to have a big enough thought bubble to create the things that became Bitcoin. And so Satoshi, however, I want to point out that I think that it is unfair to the other people that definitely contributed to Bitcoin to say that it was just Craig, because it was not just Craig that made Bitcoin possible. he had help from, sorry, I just bumped my microphone.
No problem. But, does Craig say this publicly? Because from what I have heard, Craig claims to be Satoshi Nakamoto, which would make him as the sole individual who created Bitcoin. He says, I created Bitcoin.
Yes.
Things to that effect.
And it really, it depends who's asking, and it depends on the context. I think, Craig has written articles about this at length, long articles about it, where he explains all this history.
Lots of long articles that are hard to read, which is one of the reasons why I really want to interview him. Because and I would be respectful, as I told you, in our private, because everything you've shared so far is definitely stuff that we've talked about privately. And you said that you would share on a show, so I appreciate you doing that.
For sure.
And when you made your points about the original intention of why Bitcoin was created and versus the narrative or what people want to believe, and then you, because my biggest problem, and I've said this, is a lot of the time the way that Craig Wright acts publicly, taking claim that he created Bitcoin, as if he's the sole individual, as I mentioned. He's very opinionated, but you also shared with me that he is high spectrum autistic as well.
Yeah, he is a classic Asperger's case,
which would make sense with some of the things that I mentioned.
Yeah. And it becomes more obvious as you spend time with him. Like, you sit and have dinner with him, or you sit in a small group with him over, drinks and talk about talk about video games, movies, books, philosophy, martial arts, whatever guys talk about. Right. And like, he's great. He's a good storyteller, and he knows so much about so many things, but like, you can tell, like, you can see that, like, if you just spin the dial a little bit, like, he is just 30% off center on stuff, like he doesn't read the room. He doesn't understand the social cues. Like, you can see the autism as you spend time with him. And like, it's unfortunate because he's really great when he's in a place where he's comfortable and trusts the crowd. But when you pressure him, like the second he feels like, ooh, this might be adversarial, like he's very defensive. And then you start to see that, you see the fear well up in him very quickly that he is about to get backstabbed, which is something he has dealt with a lot.
Yeah, a whole lot.
And and then it changes, and then you get defensive Craig, who is just plainly a dangerous character.
Yeah,
and,
no, I agree.
But it's all to be expected. But like, I won't disagree with the people that say that Craig Wright is a prick, because I wouldn't say he's just a nice guy, because he's not just a nice guy.
Well, we're not all perfect individuals either. So, I mean, we can't be the pot calling the kettle black.
Yeah.
But with the concept of what you were mentioning, I've always kind of had the idea that Satoshi put together all these various different technologies. Can't put them together in one single package to be utilized as what we call the Bitcoin blockchain and BTC. Do you believe that it was simply just that Craig Wright taking, from your opinion, Craig Wright taking all these different technologies and putting them together, and therefore you have all these different contributors from these different technologies? Or do you feel that there were actually people involved with helping him with that process of putting together the different technologies?
He will actually tell you the same thing if you give him enough time. And I saw him on the stand at his federal trial in Miami. It was like 40 days of trial and all of this stuff.
That was at the same time period during North American Bitcoin Conference, right?
Yep. Yeah, we met not long after that.
Yeah.
But this is a really good example of when you actually let him talk, is that he'll say, well, yeah, no, I approached, he mentions David Rees, who's a mathematician. He's like, I didn't really understand the right way to apply the ECDSA signature, like gets into like the high cryptography stuff. And he's like, look, I went to Dave because I knew he was a high level cryptography guy. Or he even says, like, I went to my best friend, Dave Kleiman, who always edited my white papers. And I said, Dave, I need you to help me edit this white paper, edit it down from, I think, 40 pages or something, and edit it down to 9. But then he admits too, he says, Hal Finney absolutely helped me with the code before it was released. So like, then it leads to the point, like, is Hal Finney Satoshi? And it's like, not really. I mean, he's like a contractor, right? Like, so Hal Finney
the
helped him.
lead guy would have been Craig, and he would have brought together different people he felt that were specialists to help him in areas that he lacked, basically.
Exactly.
Because that was going to be one of my questions was Adam Back, was Nick Szabo, was Hal Finney a part of this team that Craig Wright put together?
Not a team, but Adam Back was communicated with. Before anybody knew who Satoshi Nakamoto was, he actually emailed with Adam Back because Adam Back had created the Hashcash white paper, and he communicated with him. He's
which
like,
was cited.
He wanted to cite him, but they had a back and forth email and said, "Hey, Adam, can I use, does this work right in your opinion? Who else should I talk to about this idea?" So then Adam, okay, here, yeah, sure, you can cite me and talk to whoever. But I believe he got Adam's information, as I recall, he got it from Why Die, who's another famous old school cypherpunk. And Why Die said the same thing, like, "Oh, yeah, actually, yeah, you could cite Nick Szabo, or you could do these other things." So, like, to say that these people weren't involved at all is false. But to say that they were part of a Satoshi team is also not really the reality. It's like, me and you are casual acquaintances. If I shot you a message on Facebook and said, "Hey, Chris, you're an expert on this. What is your opinion? Should I go this direction?" And you give me "Yeah, that's the way I would handle it." I say, "Cool. Thank you, Chris." Like, do I owe you intellectual property rights at that point?
I get what you're saying, and that makes sense. Which is why I want to have a direct conversation with Craig. I've kind of come to the conclusion, as I told you, that I feel as if he wrote the white paper, that he was involved in some capacity. But him claiming to be Satoshi was one of my biggest issues. But that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation. Yeah. And then to also do a deeper dive. Now, but have you seen this article? It's and this guy, for whatever reason, has me blocked on Twitter. I was going to ask Madi Greenspan if he could find out, because he works for Quantum Economics. But Gerald Voda wrote this article. I know who Satoshi Nakamoto is. Have you seen this article?
I don't know if I have. I don't recognize the name, so I don't know. What does he claim?
So he's claiming that there's a guy from Canada. I want to get his correct name. It's like James Donald, but there's a middle initial. Yeah, and this is a really interesting one. And the reason I wanted to bring, I'd love to get you
Donald is. I'm going to let you finish, but I've got some stories about James Donald. So
okay, so I'm just looking for the full name, but James Donald was a cryptographer from Canada, and it talks about one place in particular that held some great information was eCheck website, which contains the details of CryptoKong, a software program that uses elliptical curve cryptography to sign documents electronically. This particular program is eerily familiar to the foundational basis of Bitcoin. And it also, with the way he spelled check for eCheck, it's also the very British type. Yeah. And him being Canadian made some sense. Then there's the eCheck website, which goes over some of the information, in addition to the information about Kong. So it's kind of like a precursor to Bitcoin in a lot of ways. So what are your thoughts on this guy, not knowing about this article, but knowing who he is? And
so I think the first thing that people should know about James Donald is he is a pretty well-known pedophile.
Well, he disappeared too around that same time period as Satoshi, and he was the first person to respond to Satoshi's white paper, I believe.
He was.
It was in a very quick time period that he apparently had given a pretty lengthy response about what the white paper was. So
correct.
Did he see the white paper before it was released publicly?
I don't think so.
And I didn't know about the child pedophile stuff.
James Donald has a blog, and he has something else. The name is an alias also, by the way. Like, James Donald is not his real name. So
yeah, it's like first names. It's a bunch of first names. Like, it's very serial killer-esque.
Exactly. So he was the first person to respond to Satoshi Nakamoto upon the release of the white paper and the first post to the cryptography mailing list. But what he did is he disagreed with Satoshi. In fact, Satoshi and James Donald had a pretty lengthy debate for the whole time that they had a relationship. So
But could that have been too to throw off the trail that it wasn't him to debate himself? It sounds like something Richard Hart would have done.
I mean, I mean, anything's possible, right? But
okay, I just had to throw that out there because I know some people be commenting saying, no, Craig Wright is not Satoshi.
Right. I think
you're killing my dreams of what Bitcoin was.
If James Donald was Satoshi, I would. So here's the thing. James Donald was very much a small blocker. Like his first response to Satoshi, in fact, the very first comment about Bitcoin was, well, this doesn't make sense. This isn't scalable. Everyone would need to run their own node, et cetera, et cetera. To which Satoshi responded, no, not everybody would need to run their own node. It ends up in data centers and all this stuff. So if James was Satoshi, I would have expected the main notion about Bitcoin to have been the James Donald version as opposed to the Satoshi version, because who the hell knows who James Donald is? Only a bunch of weird Bitcoin history people. But everybody knows the name Satoshi Nakamoto. So if James was Satoshi, then it would make sense for Satoshi to have come out very strongly with the small blocker agenda. Like, yes, everybody should run their own node and we should keep the blockchain as small as possible for as long as possible and all these other things. Like that we need like off-chain scaling solutions. There's just all this other stuff that like, you know, whatever Satoshi says is going to have weight in the Bitcoin space, or at least it should. And it just doesn't make sense to me that James could have such a serious opposition to the game theory, the economics, about the structure of the network and everything. Like they did nothing but disagree with each other. And so it just would strike me as very bizarre if that was the case. So
no, I didn't go through it like any of the like forums and such to read any of the communication, but I did try to do some research on the guy, and it was not a wealth of information.
No, he's mostly a
actually
ghost.
It was more stuff from Craig Wright about it than anything.
For sure.
From craigwright.net, I believe, or whatever his website is.
Yep. Yeah, Craig does not like James Donald. So one of Craig's things as a digital forensics professional was hunting human traffickers, like basically hunting pedophiles and that kind of thing. And so his opinion on James Donald is, you know, let's find this guy and kill him, essentially. Like this guy should be.
And this could be another conversation, but what you just said is interesting when he has a relationship with someone like Calvin Ayre. Because doesn't Calvin Ayre kind of have a reputation similar to?
That's another one. That's another one where it's like this reputation thing, this presumption.
Is this all basically bad media trying to paint a bad light on all these individuals?
It's the way I see it. So here's the thing, like most of this comes from a couple of photos that have come across social media, but these are
which were really bad.
So these are pictures that Calvin himself posted. This isn't like he was outed. It's Calvin like, hey, I'm at a pool party in Cuba and here's this booty dancing team. This was the tweet, right?
Yeah.
Now people are responding, Calvin, these girls look very young.
Yeah, they don't look like they're old enough for you to be taking their picture illegally.
Well, but here's the thing.
But that could be a misconception of mine because they could just look really young.
First of all, you live in Miami too, right?
No, I live in North Carolina.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, you're wearing the Miami shirt, and we met in Miami. But anyways,
might as well.
Pool parties, right? How do people dress at pool parties?
Like in the pictures of Calvin Ayre's.
Right. So if like somebody points out, hey, that guy over there, he's one of the richest men in the world. He's a billionaire. Go take a picture with him. Okay. That's great. I'd love to take a picture with this billionaire. Cool. They're all in bikinis. Nobody's touching anybody else. It's daylight.
Yeah, no. It wasn't I don't think a very smart decision on his part.
I agree with that. I will give you that. This is from a PR standpoint.
Now, I haven't done a deep dive on Calvin Ayre at all. I know that he does a lot of financing for what is block
and chain. So Calvin's one of the most successful gambling tycoons ever. Created the Bodog gambling brand. He actually brought internet to Canada. All kinds of stuff. Calvin is a multi-billionaire many times over off of a lot of really disruptive business. Now, Calvin is one of the larger investors of N-Chain. He's one of the larger investors in Tal Mining. He owns a number of other brands, and he's a venture capitalist in the BSV space. But that's it. That's his role.
Yeah.
He's a rich guy who likes big block Bitcoin, and like, people have made accusations about him, but actually, a couple of news sites that posted very specifically, like, this appears to be illegal, Calvin's doing these things. They were sent letters essentially saying, look, you can provide any kind of evidence that anything immoral or illegal or anything occurred, or you can issue us an apology, or you can see us in court. And
for like defamation, basically,
like, and to which Calvin even said, like, what do you think? I'm going to post a picture of people that I've molested and broken? Like, I literally posted a picture with some girls at a pool party and said, hey, here's the official Cuban booty dancing team, or whatever the hell he said. It's something to that effect,
Yeah, I get it. Okay.
And it's like the dude lives in Antigua. He lives in the Caribbean. Everyone wears nothing but bathing suits all day. And again, like, nobody's touching anybody. Nobody's like, it's literally Calvin sitting in a chair in front of everybody doing a peace sign, and a few girls standing around him taking pictures. Like, it just, the whole thing is, to me, like, I look at it and I'm like, are they young? Yeah, they're they're not women in their 30s or 40s, but like, what is the gigantic problem, basically? And the real gigantic problem is people don't like Calvin because he supports Craig and he supports big block Bitcoin. And so from a PR standpoint, I completely agree.
Yeah.
Tone deaf, was not the right time or place as an already contentious person in the economy. But like, at the end of the day, it was like,
well, it sucks for you in a sense, being being somebody who works at CoinGeek, who's very pro BSV and does a lot of interviews, runs the weekly live streams on CoinGeek, YouTube channel, which again, I'll have all that link down below. You gotta, in a sense, rehash these kind of questions with all the different people that you're interviewing about, the character of both Craig Wright and Calvin Ayre. And I know that sucks for you. So,
well, and the thing is like, I know both guys too. Like, I know Calvin. I've had dinner with Calvin. Like, it's not a, not a theoretical thing for me either. And it's like, you talk to these people and you create these like memes of who people are. And like, Calvin, at the end of the day, like, Calvin's a pretty regular dude. Like, you get rid of all the, billionaire, owns islands, has houses on every continent, and owns an airline and just all this other stuff. And like, you sit and talk to him about Bitcoin or business or whatever else, and it's like, he's just a guy. And like, you just you realize, like, you know what, I'm treating this like he's like a super villain or something. And at the end of the day, it's just like any other dude. Like, you sit and have a drink with him, you talk about your favorite thing or the thing you don't like, and you laugh about whatever. And like, he's a Bitcoiner. Like, you get him talking about Bitcoin and you see him light up the way that all of us light up. And it's like we need to stop treating people like, assuming that they're super villains, and and realize, what, we're all here because we care about what is possible to accomplish with this technology. And then like, it extrapolates out from there, And so for me, it's, I don't know if it's okay for me to say that Calvin is a friend. Like, we're work associates and I respect him and we have a good relationship, but I don't know.
I respect it, dude. And I appreciate you being forthcoming.
Yeah.
And I definitely look forward to being able to do, more conversations and do a deeper dive into the whole BSV element. And,
for sure,
like I said, hopefully you can help me out with Dr. Craig Wright. That would be great. I think that would be an epic conversation. And again, I would try to be as fair as I possibly can. I'm very open-minded. Even if I disagree, I may wait till the end of, our conversation to share my disagreements, but it would be a conversation that I would love to have, and hopefully other people would like to see it. And I would also encourage people to make sure that they're being kind as possible in the comment section, because I know I'm going to get a lot of hate. I'm sure you get a lot of hate.
Sure do.
Because BSV is not the most popular blockchain in a crypto space, but that's one of the reasons why I want to do a deeper dive, because I found out some really interesting things. I've seen a lot of the applications that run on it. the fact that Craig is claiming that every blockchain in existence could run on BSV and not congest the network. I'm very fascinated to learn more about that as well. So I appreciate your time, man. Before we wrap up, I will include everything that I've been screen sharing. But do you have any final thoughts or anything that you would like to add?
I think, tribalism is what it is. People want to pigeonhole me as just a BSV shill or something. And really, at the end of the day, I'm a Bitcoin fan. Like, I want to see the world become a better place because of the technology that Satoshi Nakamoto gave us. But I also want to have good relationships with people. I want to cooperate with people. I like business, and I like to create things with people who want to create things that didn't exist yesterday, but we created them today. And now it's possible to distribute them using this disruptive technology. So for me, it's not, pad my portfolio, buy my bags, that kind of thing. I don't care. I don't care if anybody wants to buy BSV. I don't care if you want to use the applications. But if you do, if you have a reduced payment friction business use case or a data integrity use case where you want to store things on chain, it doesn't really matter if Craig is Satoshi or if he's not, or if you like the people in the community or not. This is a tool. It is a tool for business. It is a tool for freedom. It is a tool to take back your identity, to connect your identity to your keys and utilize it in a way that you control. And those are all the things that I care about. And I think people should care about them too. I think that's the interesting part of the story. And the other stuff is all like, it's intrigue. But at the end of the day, I just want to work with people. I want to have a good time. I want to make friends, and I'm here to make history. I could be working at some other dorky job. I used to work in cybersecurity and do cool stuff there, but I care about Bitcoin. I care about this whole fight. So I guess that's it. I'll close on that.
Well, dude, I mean, again, I appreciate your time and thank you for sharing your perspective. And I'm definitely looking forward to more conversations. If you could bear with me, just going to wrap up the recording. So again, ladies and gentlemen, going to have everything linked down below. So I encourage you to check out all the websites, follow Kurt over on Twitter, also share his information for his link tree, which also has various different links that you could check out. Check out CoinGeek, check out the CoinGeek YouTube channel. Stay tuned for a future episode doing a deeper dive into BSV and hopefully a future interview with Dr. Craig Wright. If you're not already subscribed, it's your first time watching my videos, I would encourage you to make sure you're subscribed, hit the like button. If you hit the notification bell, sometimes YouTube will notify you when my videos come out. And I will leave you with this: be blessed, be the change, practice change, and I'll see you on the next show.